Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to discuss about respiration. The respiration is the biochemical process in which food, and we know food mainly glucose, is broken down to release energy. Right? So before respiration we discussed about digestion. Digestion is a process where complex food is broken down into simpler form because that food provides us energy, and mainly carbohydrate, and complex carbohydrate is broken down into simple form, that is known as glucose. Okay, now this glucose is broken down to release energy, and the process in which this food or glucose is broken down to release energy is known as respiration. So it is a biochemical process. Now, what is its purpose? Obviously, to release energy, and energy is released in the form of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, and this energy is then used to perform all life functions like movement, growth, repair, reproduction. Okay, so don't get confused between breathing and respiration. Breathing is just a physical process where we take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, but respiration is a cellular process, okay, where glucose is oxidized to release energy. Now there are two types of respiration: aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay, so aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. Okay, let's first discuss about aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen, and here glucose is completely broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Okay, and this produces a large amount of energy. 38 ATP molecules are produced, and this process or aerobic respiration takes place in mitochondria. And we know mitochondria is known as powerhouse of cell because in mitochondria this ATP is produced. So let me write the equation of it. So we know what is the formula of glucose: C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of O2 combines and they produce 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and with this large amount of energy is released in the form of ATP. Okay, now let's talk about anaerobic respiration. We know anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. Okay, and here in aerobic respiration we saw there is a complete breakdown of glucose. Now in anaerobic respiration there is incomplete breakdown of glucose and it produces less energy. So only 2 ATP molecules are produced. Now this anaerobic respiration occurs in yeast, some bacteria, and muscle cells. Yes, or muscle cells during heavy exercise. First in yeast. Through this process is also known as alcoholic fermentation. Here, glucose is broken down into ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy. Okay, so this process takes place without oxygen, so glucose is converted into ethanol, okay, carbon dioxide, and little amount of energy is liberated. This is in yeast, okay, and second one is in our muscle cells, that is also known as lactic acid fermentation. So in muscles, this glucose is broken down into lactic acid and little amount of energy is liberated. Okay, and this causes muscle cramps due to lactic acid accumulation. Think about whenever you exercise or you do some heavy workout, suddenly you feel a slight pain in your muscles. It is because of the accumulation of this lactic acid, and it is produced in muscles. We just discussed about breakdown of glucose by various pathways. First, we saw in cytoplasm, glucose, that is 6 carbon molecule, is converted into pyruvate, that is 3 carbon molecule, and energy is also produced. Now, this breakdown or the release of energy takes place in the absence of oxygen or in the presence of oxygen. Like in yeast, in absence of oxygen, ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy are produced, and this energy is very little or less. Okay, now sometimes in our muscle cells, when we do heavy workouts and our cells need energy, they have lack of oxygen, then this is converted into lactic acid and energy is liberated, and lactic acid is a 3 carbon molecule. Okay, and in the presence of oxygen that occurs in mitochondria, this glucose is completely broken down into carbon dioxide, water, and very much energy is liberated. Okay, so this energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP. Okay, and what is ATP? It is the energy currency for most cellular processes, right? And this ATP molecule is produced from ADP and inorganic phosphate. So here you can see when an inorganic phosphate, that is this P, gets combined with the ADP, adenosine diphosphate, then they combine to produce ATP, okay, with the help of energy, and this energy is provided by the process of respiration. Okay, respiration in humans is the process of taking in oxygen, okay. Why? To break down glucose inside cells and release carbon dioxide, okay, along with energy, and we know ATP. Respiration process involves both breathing and cellular respiration. We will now learn the mechanism of breathing. So breathing involves two processes: inhale and exhale. When we inhale, rib contracts, and this contraction causes rib cage to move upward and outward, okay, and at the same time diaphragm moves downwards. So this movement of both rib cage and diaphragm causes the chest cavity to open. Okay, it open or it becomes larger. So the air gets filled inside it. But when we exhale, what happens? Ribs relaxes, okay? And ribs when ribs relax, the rib cage is moved inward, okay, and downward, okay, and at the same time diaphragm moves upwards, and because of it the chest cavity becomes smaller. It becomes smaller, so the air is pulled out of it, and we know oxygen is inhaled and CO2 is exhaled. So this is the simple mechanism of breathing. Now, how respiratory system in human work, let's discuss about it. And the main organs of human respiratory system are nose, nasal passage, that is also known as nasal cavity, trachea, bronchi, lungs, and diaphragm, right? So we know human respiratory system begins from the nose, and we know our nose have two holes which are called nostrils. There is a passage in the nose behind the nostrils which is called nasal passage or nasal cavity. So the air for respiration is drawn into our body through the nostrils present in the nose. This air then goes into the nasal passage, and then this nasal passage is separated from the mouth cavity, or that is also known as buccal cavity or oral cavity, by a hard bony palate, so that we can breathe in air even when we are eating out. Okay, and this nasal passage is lined with fine hair and mucus. When air passes through the nasal passage, the dust particles and other impurities present in it are trapped by these nasal hair and mucus, so that clean air goes into the lungs. Now the part of throat between the mouth and windpipe is called pharynx. From the nasal passage, air enters into pharynx, okay, and then goes into the windpipe or trachea. Now trachea is a tube which is commonly known as windpipe. The air coming from the nostrils during breathing passes through the trachea. A trachea does not collapse even when there is no air in it, because it is supported by rings of soft bones called cartilage. Here you can see the rings of cartilage that protects the trachea. And the upper end of trachea has a voice box called larynx. Trachea runs down the neck and divides into two smaller tubes called bronchi. Here you can see they are divided, and the two bronchi are connected to the two lungs. The lungs lie in the chest cavity or thoracic cavity, which is separated from abdominal cavity by a muscular partition called diaphragm. And the lungs are covered by two thin membranes called pleura. Lungs are enclosed in a rib cage made of bones called ribs. Now, each bronchus divides into the lungs to form a large number of smaller tubes called bronchioles. And the smallest bronchioles have tiny air sacs at their end. And they have these pouch-like air sac at the end of the smallest bronchioles called alveoli. So we have millions of alveoli in the lungs that provide a very large area for the exchange of gases. Okay, so it is in the alveoli that gaseous exchange takes place. Now we have learned about the process of inhale or breathing it. So we saw oxygen gets entered. So when the oxygen gets entered, this oxygen is further carried by blood to all parts of the body. Okay, and this oxygen is carried by a red pigment called hemoglobin, present in our blood. And then this oxygen diffuses into the cells and combines with our digested food to release energy. And the carbon dioxide gas is produced as a waste product during respiration in the cells of the body tissue, and it is diffused into the blood and then carried to the lungs, and where it diffuses into the alveoli. So when we breathe out, it gets out of the body. So this is how the human respiratory system works. So alveoli are the sides of gaseous exchange. We'll talk about other things later.